The man sees the woman run frantically through the streets, leaving her shoes behind. She sees her footprints grow bloody as the rough road and uneven pavement scrape at her bare skin. Quickly behind her is her assailant, chasing her like a madman. He had been chasing her for 20 blocks, and will probably chase her for 20 more or beyond. A drunkard who believes himself a lover, but is nothing to her at all. It is like this. It is always like this. A good man once said, the police are the public, and the public are the police. They represent the common interest, the public interest, and must be taken from the likes of the masses. The police enforces laws and morals, acting as a consciousness to the public. A police force is a reflection of the state of humanity. Should affairs be in order, there is nothing for them to do except stand vigil. But what if the public lacks morality? Clang clang. She runs fast, too fast, and trips over her own feet. He sees this, and seeing the opportunity, already the assailant grabs hold of her far too easily. Around the alleyway, there are windows, apartments, people. She cries for help, but all of the windows are shut now. Tenants pretending that no tragedies occur in here. It is easier. It invites less trouble, less hassle, less pain. There is historical precedence for such a thing, over and over again. It is fear that paralyzes, that brutalizes, that makes monsters of men. Who the fuck is that? The assailant has stopped in his tracks now, halfway through his actions, with no regard for the bitter tears of his victim. She can smell him, his whiskey breath, and there is a redness around the eyes. Even in this state, it is easy for her to see the uniform he wears. Shoddy and frayed, but still clearly visible. Metropolitan Police. Perhaps once upon a time, he was a bright-eyed and eager recruit, dedicated to making the world a better place. Or perhaps he had always been a power-hungry fiend, and joining the force was a way to exert power over others. A pity. It is then I approach quietly from my hiding place. His eyes bulge from his head in fright, shaking fingers making the sign of the cross. Through her eyes, I can see misery and fear as he massively relieves himself. Perhaps the criminal believes it will be leniency, but he should know better. In these few seconds, he will have a chance to reflect on his sins and understand what brought him here, before me. He will understand why I have come for him, in the dark of the night, to deliver unto him the justice that is necessary. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who will guard the guards themselves? It is a statement I quietly reflect on, as the cries of fear turn into those of pain, and as the sound of pain fade into the pulpy bludgeoning, as my bell makes short work of the remains of his head. The woman is vomiting from nausea and fear, but it is something I am used to. I turn my head to her, and she backs away, babbling, before fainting as all goes black. Hopefully this does not break her mind completely. I would like for her to be able to return to her normal life. You ask men to judge men, and you ask monsters to judge monsters. Sir Robert was a good man, the best of men, and it was he who made me understand that. It was through his eyes I first understood what I was. Faceless, friendless, and worthless. But he saw in me a gift and gave me a purpose. The uniform, the bell, the beliefs. I would watch the watchmen and keep the peace, see through their eyes and the eyes of so many others. A thankless task, as so many more of them grow drunk on power or cowardly with prejudice. But it must be done. Feeling the rough wall of the street, I can see again and again and again as windows are finally opened. There are screams of panic and fear, but these quickly become hushed as I raise my bow to the sky, beautifully bronzed by time and iron, freshly coated in the sins of the watchman. One strong flick of my wrist to announce the coming of dawn and the proclamation of justice. Cassidy Jones was 8 years old, and probably the biggest liar I've ever met. She always sat in the back of Mrs. Asher's third grade class, and only spoke up when she felt that enough attention wasn't being paid to her. We had grown up used to her dubious claims. It had become so commonplace, in fact, that most of the students didn't even bother making fun of her anymore. There wasn't any use. For every outrageous lie you managed to unravel, she would come ready with another one. My dad has a stash of money buried in the basement of our house. You could buy a whole other house with it all. Yesterday, I was in my backyard and I saw a big snake slithering through the woods. It was 8 feet long and 2 feet around. I looked in the teacher's lounge the other day and saw Mr. Russ kissing Mrs. Paulson. Needless to say, no one really paid attention to her. Her lies might have worked had we been a few years younger, but we were almost entering 4th grade by that point. We knew enough about the world by then to take almost everything she said with a grain of salt. One day, Cassidy was late to school. We whispered around the class. She was never late to class. About 10 minutes after we began, she walked in, looking exhausted. She sat next to me in the back row, so naturally, I had to ask her on behalf of the entire class. "Why were you late? You never are." Cassidy smiled as she set her backpack down. "I got carried away talking to my new friend." A few of our classmates snickered. Cassidy had few, if any, friends. "Who?" I asked. "The sun." The whole class went quiet at these words. Someone sitting nearby asked, "What do you mean, the sun?" "I told you. I climbed my ladder to the sun and sat with him in his room." This kind of lie was unprecedented, even for Cassidy. Until that point, they had been far-fetched, but not overly impossible. Now she was telling us that she had a ladder that led to the sun in her closet? We wanted to press for more, but at that moment, Mrs. Asher walked in. We had to wait until recess. "Give me a break, Cassidy. That can't possibly be true," Logan told her later that day. Cassidy shook her head and grinned. "It's true. He appeared a few days ago. Every time I went to visit, I just hid in my closet, and his ladder comes down. I climb up, and I sit there with him, talking. If I get cold, he gives off heat. If I get scared of the dark, he burns brighter to chase his shadows away." The funny thing was, Cassidy wouldn't let this lie drop. She usually went on to talking about a new one every day or two, but it had been over a week, and still she continually updated us on her and her friendship with the sun. It was a few weeks after the story was first told that Cassidy passed out invitations to her birthday party for that coming weekend. In all honesty, none of us would have gone. No one really wanted to be known as Cassidy's only friend. However, it was common knowledge that her parents were rich, and therefore her party was bound to have expensive gifts, or at the very least, an interesting house to look at. So that Saturday, about 10 of us showed up for her 9th birthday party. She tried to introduce us to her parents, but her dad was working in his office, and her mom had locked herself in a room. The cake was a huge chocolate rectangle with overly sweet icing, the kind they sell at grocery stores like Subway or Costco. No one really wanted to eat it, so we kinda just sat around watching TV. I was almost falling asleep when an idea popped into my head. I asked Cassidy where the bathroom was, and she pointed me up the stairs. When I reached the top, instead of turning right towards the bathroom, I turned left towards the door of Cassidy's room. If she had been carrying on with the sun story for as long as she had, there had to be something good in there. Once inside, I pulled open the door to her closet. I stood there for a few seconds, expecting something to happen. But nothing did. I looked all around the interior space, but only clothes and a jumbled mess of shoes. Sighing, I turned to go when I accidentally stepped on a stuffed animal that was lying on the doorway, which emitted a loud squeak. Somewhere overhead, I heard the pattering of feet, followed by a heavy, dull thud. The sound of squeaking hinges came from behind me, and I turned around. There, on the ceiling of Cassidy's closet, a trapdoor opened, just a crack. Through the maybe 3 inches of space, I saw 2 large orbs of light floating over a thin line, which soon opened itself to reveal a mouth. Before I could do anything, a heat wave burst from the space, burning my eyes. Crying out, I stumbled back out of the closet, as I heard the door swing shut behind me. I clumsily walked back downstairs and used the phone to call my mom to pick me up early. Apparently, most of the other kids had done the same, because only about 3 of my classmates remained. As I was walking out the door, I turned and apologized to Cassidy for not believing her. It was about a month after that weekend that we began to notice a change in her. She wasn't as attention-seeking or happy as usual. Sure, we all still didn't really want to be friends with her, but we had developed a strange sort of affection for her outlandish stories. I stopped her during lunch one day and asked her what was wrong. My parents have been fighting a lot over the past month. Dad works late, and Mom barely talks to him when he's home. They don't pay attention to me either. The only time they seem to care about me is during dinner. I did my best to comfort her, but the years I had gotten caught up in teasing her hindered me. The best I could do was try to tell her that everything was going to be alright. I don't think she believed me. This continued on for another 3 weeks or so. Every day, she seemed to get more and more withdrawn and depressed. I did my best to talk to her more and make her feel better. The stories of fights between her parents got more frequent. One day, Cassidy arrived at the school with an unexpected smile plastered on her face. She sat down at her desk, ready to learn, and even started telling her strange stories again. I saw her during recess and asked her what had caused such a shift in her mood. Mom and Dad are getting a divorce. They don't care about me. All they want to do is divide up all the things they own. I told his son about all this, and he said I could stay in his room while they get everything together. My stomach dropped. Cassidy, are you sure that's a good idea? I tried to make my trepidation obvious, but it seemed lost on her. It isn't going to be forever, just until Mom and Dad get their divorce taken care of. At this, she walked away. I considered running after her again and asking whether she really thought it was a good idea, but in the end, I didn't. I tried to rationalize what I saw in her closet that day, telling myself it was just a figment of my imagination or a hallucination caused by tiredness. I'm not sure if I believed myself. As she walked out the double doors of the school towards her mom's car, she turned and waved at me one last time. Waving back, I watched as the car sped off. She wasn't at school the next day, or the one after that. On the third day, Mrs. Asher made a tearful announcement that stopped me dead in my tracks. Cassidy was dead. Throughout the whole school day, I sat looking at Cassidy's empty desk. I found it hard to believe that someone who had seemed so happy could be dead all of a sudden. I felt numb and sick and sorry for the years I had spent joining my classmates in their ridicule. Logan's dad was captain of the police force. He was handling her case, and Logan had apparently overheard all the details. I didn't really want to find out what happened, but in the end, my curiosity won out. Cassidy had a ladder to the attic space in her closet. On the day of her death, she hadn't come down to breakfast. Her mom went to her room and saw that it was down. Climbing up, she found her huddled in a corner, all black and red and burned to a crisp. There were scorch marks all along the window frame and down the tree right outside, followed by footprints of burnt grass leading into the woods behind the house. Every elementary school has a ridiculous urban legend. My school had Muppet Man, and I hated him. Muppet Man was deformed. Ill-fated plastic surgery left him with the ghastly proportions of a marionette puppet. So he wore a fluffy animal costume he'd stolen from the school theater. He lived in an ancient oak tree in the recess yard. Some kids claimed he lived in the branches, watching us play from camouflage hideouts of leaves and twigs. The morbid kids said he lived in the trunk, eating caterpillar larvae and torturing the ghost of Jason Hughes. Jason Hughes wasn't an urban legend, unfortunately. He was just a tragedy, a doomed anxious wreck, cursed with ridiculous outsized glasses and an obsession with drawing. I remember feeling angry one rainy afternoon because I wanted to color with the teacher's new markers, but Jason already used all the paper in the classroom. Nobody liked him much, including me, but don't know why. He was a sweet kid, fretful, anxious, and too smart for his own good, but sweet. Jason disappeared on a November evening in 2nd grade. A few days later, a teacher found his clothes piled at the base of the schoolyard oak tree. The principal called a school assembly to make the announcement. He made it sound like the clothes had been laundered and neatly folded. But my dad, a cop at the time, a cop with the bad habit of telling his kids things nobody should have to know, told me Jason's clothes were filthy. Worse than filthy, in fact, matted with urine, feces, and blood. He told me I couldn't repeat it to nobody. I never did. It was too horrifying to even think about, let alone share. That's why I hated Muppet Man. Nobody could say his name without some snot-nosed little shit from behind the tracks saying Jason's. A horrifying schoolyard litany. That was another problem. The kids at school knew Jason was my neighbor, and they knew my dad was a cop. After weeks of hysterical interest, I was abruptly ostracized. It suited me fine. Over the past couple years, my dad had arrested the parents of at least 2 kids in my class, and they gave me hell for it. It was alright. I preferred books to people anyway, and spent every recess reading under the oak tree. Sometimes, I pretended to read to Jason's ghost. Penance, I guess, for treating him so poorly. One day in February, I got to school 2 or 3 hours late. I don't remember why. I only remember getting to school and plodding across the empty recess yard. That time of the year my little corner of the world is hard to live in. The sky goes from polished steel in the morning to icy steel in the evening, and at night dims to a flat, watery darkness that makes my heart ache. The plants are all dead, the trees skeletal, except for flourishing colonies of mistletoe. It looks like despair. The empty recess yard was no exception. Everything was gray and pale, and somehow brittle, like it would crack and shatter if you touched it. The almost preternatural stillness turned that pale winter fragility into something sinister. Paranoia scrolled through me suddenly. What if, just what if, it was true? What if the universe was broken? What if the scene before me was a fragile husk, just waiting for a misplaced step to break it into pieces? I swallowed a surge of panic and took extra care with each step, setting my foot down with excruciating gentleness. Sand crunched under my soles. Everything felt solid. But the sense of glassy fragility persisted. I fought the urge to close my eyes and walked as quickly as I dared. My path took me right past the oak tree. Black-brown glass bark glimmered faintly. Branches threw spiderweb patterns against the grim sky. They were bare, except for a nest of mistletoe. The tree was infested with it. Suddenly, with a disconcerting, painfully adult burst of clarity, it occurred to me. The tree was dying. I slowed to a halt, staring at it, with the kind of hushed reverence you're supposed to feel in church. The tree was scary, but beautiful at the same time. More than that, it was a pillar of my memory. It was visible from my backyard, towering over the school, and my childhood, like a reassurance, an eternal century. Except it wasn't eternal. It would be gone someday, maybe before I left grade school, maybe sooner. My throat felt hot and tight. I took in the sight of the bare branches and tried to mentally edit out the mistletoe clusters. It was difficult. They burst from the tree, thicker than summer leaves, and they kept moving, jostled, no doubt, by the cold winter wind. Except another brutal, bleak epiphany. There was no wind. The dark mistletoe rustled and writhed like a trapped serpent. Cold air stung my eyes as they widened. Bright bursts of color flickered unexpectedly among the branches, slithering through the mistletoe like a multicolored feather boa, and glittering as sinuous rope of color. Eyes. Glassy round eyes the color of limes. The rope of color broke into tendrils and grew, not unlike the fungus in which it nested, overtaking the darkness with eye-watering vibrant neon hues. Then they twined back together, warming behind branches and mistletoe before resolving into a fluffy, ridiculously proportioned caricature of an animal, a cartoon incarnate, a Muppet. "Hello," it said. Its voice made me jump, full and hearty and unpleasantly friendly. A cartoon voice. My lip trembled. Tears pricked my eyes, scorching and frigid at once. "You're not real." "Yes, I am." It fits me with a sharp, reptilian stare that made me want to scream. I might even be realer than you. The world looked glassier than ever, faded and brittle, except for the obscenely bright monstrosity above me. I stamped my foot and held my breath, praying that the world would shatter, taking the technicolor monster with it. If I broke a broken world, would I break anything at all? But the pavement remained solid. The frozen show bypassed the soles of my shoes and leached into my feet. The creature stretched and stretched and stretched, slowly making its way down the trunk of the tree, simultaneously sloth-like and reptilian, bursting with the ridiculous Crayola fur. It should have been funny. Why wasn't it funny? Why was I scared? Why wasn't I running away? It slid down the bark until its eyes were level with my own. Only real things, it intoned, can hide themselves in plain sight. Real things like me and Jason Hughes. Your friends call me Muppet Man. You can too. It stretched out a hand, long and absurdly thin, almost like a distorted frog feet, except for the rainbow fur. I turned and ran into the school, screaming all the way. The poor nurse tried to extract the story from me. I don't even remember what I said. I just remember hiding under her desk and sobbing. When I finally blubbered the words Muppet Man and Jason, the school went on lockdown. The cops came. My father wasn't with them. I watched through the window, gagging and crying and trying to forget Muppet Man's bright green eyes. But how could I, when everything else, the oak tree, the police, the nurse, and the sky, and my own shaking hands, looked so brittle and faded? Muppet Man was the only vibrant thing, the only bright thing, the only whole thing, the only real thing. Sometime later, maybe a minute, maybe 10 hours for all I knew, a cop came into the nurse's office. He grabbed my elbow over the protections of the nurse and marched me outside. The world rushed past me in a gray, dead, glittering blur. The tree loomed ahead, dark and blank, and terribly close. I flailed, but he dragged me to the oak tree and shoved me forward. I stopped inches from the bark, dark and dead and cracked, except for absurd tufts of technicolor fur. "Did you do that?" the cop demanded. "Do what?" I screamed. "Do what? Did you put that?" He pointed to a particularly obscene knot of neon pink fur. "On this tree?" I told him no. I told him it was Muppet Man, that I've seen Muppet Man, that Muppet Man knew Jason, and now he knew me. The nurse sent me home shortly thereafter, and my parents packed me off to my grandparents' house in San Diego that very night. I stayed for 3 weeks. Stayed until I stopped having nightmares of Muppet Man eating Jason's bloody, shit-stained clothes while I watched, trapped by his bright eyes like a deer in headlights. I got home on a Wednesday evening. I know it was Wednesday because I remember looking at my mom's calendar, big and glossy and full of bagel puppies. It always made me smile. My parents fed me Burger King and ice cream cake, then sent me to bed. When I pulled my covers back, I froze. Everything around me blanched, turning pale and glassy. Everything except the tufts of neon bright fur on my pillow. My parents assumed I did it and yelled at me for almost an hour, but they let me sleep in their bed anyway. School was a nightmare. I spent the entire morning dreading recess. When the bell rang, I thought about throwing a tantrum just to stay in the classroom. But I'd get in trouble. My parents would be angry. I'd go to the principal's office. Besides, there would be other kids on the playground. Vibrant, living, colorful, noisy kids. All that noise and brightness might be too much for Muppet Man. I told myself these things, but still ran to the bathroom when the bell rang. I threw up, then sat in the stall until a teacher, summoned no doubt by a tattletale, came and told me I had to go outside. I dithered in the corner by the tetherball cord, as far from the oak tree as I could get. Even from a distance, I caught glimpses of bright fur slithering through the branches. I told myself I was seeing things. When the days finally got warmer, steel skies softened into rich blue in the daytime and Easter egg colors at night. Bare branches sprout and buds. Flowers grown in the planter boxes all around the school. I even resumed my recess ritual of reading under the tree. I was cautious at first, but determined. Every adult in my life had convinced me that I was hallucinating. Every kid in the school knew that I had a breakdown about Muppet Man. The taunts alone were enough to steal my resolve. Before I knew it, I was reading under the tree like always. The glassy winter horror was barely more than a memory. One afternoon in April, something pulled me out of my book. I didn't know what it was at first. Maybe the kids screaming on the jungle gym. Maybe the 5th grade girls gossiping a few yards away. Maybe the warm breeze rustling the leaves. I looked down and gasped. A larvae crawled along my arms. The yellow-white caterpillar worms that lived in the bark. The kinds all the kids said Muppet Man loved to eat. I ran to the tetherball cord and lingered until the bell rang. When I got home that afternoon, I found clusters of neon fur all over my bedroom. I ran to my mother. She lost her temper, marched me into the backyard, and told me to stay until she was done cleaning after me. When I finished crying, I settled myself under the apricot tree and got lost in my book. As the afternoon light deepened, rich daylight giving way to copper, something snapped me out of my reverie. I looked down and saw white worms, soft and tiny, and somehow wet, inching over my arms. "Hello," whispered an unpleasantly friendly voice. "Sorry it's been so long. I guess I've been a bad friend." "I'm crazy," I whispered. I snapped my book shut and closed my eyes. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Scratchy polyester fur crumpled against my skin. "Not crazy," Muppet Man said. "Just really real. Like me and Jason Hughes." "What are you reading?" He reached out. Blinding multicolored fur blazing in the dapple sunlight, and flipping the book over. "Black Beauty. Is it good?" "It's great," I wheezed. I wanted to leap to my feet, wanted to run screaming into the house, but my bones felt watery and frozen at once. I wouldn't be able to stand up, let alone run. Muppet Man brushed the worms off my arms and settled down beside me. His fur made me feel itchy. I didn't look up. I already knew what I would see. That slothy dinosaur face, dominated by glassy eyes that would blaze in the dying sun. I didn't want to see it. I was afraid of what would happen if I did. "My mom will see you," I whispered. He patted my arm, fur crunching again. "You should read to me." Tears flooded my eyes. "No." Strong, fussy fingers wrapped my wrist. "I want you to read to me." "No." "If you read to me, I'll take you to Jason Hughes." I almost scoffed. Jason Hughes with the giant glasses and mean voice. Anxious Jason Hughes, who stole all the art paper in the classroom just to draw his stupid fish and stupid beetles. Jason Hughes, who've been reduced to bloody, shit-stained clothes at the base of the schoolyard tree. Why? I asked. Because we're lonely, Muppet Man said. I glanced at the house, praying my mother would look out and see us. If he's lonely, he should go home. He can't. His mom doesn't like him. I pondered this briefly. I thought of my dad. My poor dad who worked himself to death with overtime. My poor dad who couldn't catch a break at work. But what if I could help him? What if I could find Jason Hughes and give my dad all the credit? When would I see Jason? It depends, said Muppet Man, on how well you read. I opened my book to the very first page and began to read out loud. The scrape of the sliding glass door broke my concentration shortly after. I looked up and saw my mom. My heart leapt to my throat. I spun around hopefully, but Muppet Man was gone. The next morning, I found clumps of neon fur in my dresser drawers. It clung to my pants and shirts like lint. At the end of May, I found a note on my windowsill, neatly folded construction paper, printed with brightly colored marker. Come to the school tree tonight at 11. Muppet Man. Coarse strands of yellow, pink, and blue hair sprinkled the note. I brushed them off and tucked the paper in my pocket. I wasn't stupid. I knew I couldn't go alone. I was terrified of Muppet Man, and almost as terrified of what my parents would do to me if they caught me sneaking out. So I went to my father. I showed him the note and begged him until I wept. He accused me of making it all up for a while, but in the end, he agreed to take me to the school at the appointed time. We lived only a few blocks away, so we walked. The evening was unreasonably cold, almost as cold as the day I first met Muppet Man. I fought back tears the entire way, clutching my father's hand with both of my own. The school gates were locked, of course, but there was a small gate hidden in the passage behind the cafeteria. It had nothing but a simple latch. The kids all knew about it, but the adults never did anything. I led my father around the perimeter of the playground, keeping close to the building in order to hide in the shadows. Wait here, I whispered. He obliged, looking tired even in the darkness. I looked at the tree. It didn't look sick anymore. Leaves hid the mistletoe infestation. It looked full and healthy, the eternal century once more. I stood by the trunk and whispered, "Hello?" Something rustled among the leaves overhead. "Hello," came Muppet Man's warm, full voice. "Where's Jason?" The branches rattled, and a dark, furry shape slithered down the tree. Glassy eyes caught the light of the moon and blazed. "He's inside me." Muppet Man twisted and stretched down the tree until his eyes were level with mine. No longer was he vibrant or bright. His fur was filthy, caked with mud and sand, and bare, dirty canvas replaced large swaths of the once lush neon coat. Of course he was missing fur. He'd been leaving clumps of it all over my room for months. It was a wonder he had any hair left. "What do you mean?" My voice issued a thin, wheezy whine. Muppet Man crept closer, holding me captive with his glassy eyes. His long, thin fingers touched his skin and pushed, sliding into his face and pulling it up like a child removing a Halloween mask. My heart thudded, heavy and horrid as a war drum. Enormous glasses glinted in the moonlight. tragically outsized for the decayed little face underneath. Jason Hughes' rotted head was gray and so very fragile, gleaming like clouded glass under the moon. If I touched him, he would shatter. The absurd costume fell to the ground with a whisper, dull and faded. Even the eyes were dead now. The costume was dead. It had never been alive. Jason's empty sockets bulged, then broke and split apart with a series of soft, peppery pops. Something roiled inside, thick and dark, and gleaming with 1,000 dim lights, in colors I couldn't name. The world flipped, and cold playground sand dug into my face. My dad's scream shattered the glassy silence. Perhaps it shattered Jason's poor dead face too. I curled up and lay still as my dad screamed, and sirens wailed in the distance. The ruined costume went into an evidence locker. Jason himself was laid to rest several weeks later. They held onto the body as long as they did in order to find out what happened to him. I asked my father about it, but he refused to tell me. I was disappointed, yet relieved, and I never tried to find out on my own. I did my best to forget everything, and actually came close. I might have managed, had my father kept his mouth shut. He has a habit of telling me things I shouldn't know, things nobody should know. I guess it's a personal exorcism. Freeing demons that haunt you. It's just that the problem with freeing demons is that demons usually go on to haunt someone else. My dad retired a few years ago, but he still has friends on the force. They get together and talk every once in a while. They had one of their visits last night, and one of his friends brought up Jason Hughes. Did they find the guy who did it? My dad asked. No, said his friend. But the costume, that weird puppet costume, it's not in evidence anymore. It's gone. Did someone take it? Did they accidentally toss it? We don't know. That alone was enough to haunt me forever. But it didn't stop at enough. Demons never stop at enough, if they ever stop at all. I know this because when I got up this morning, I found dirty tufts of neon fur scattered all across my bedroom floor.